again, I'm going to take Discrimination and Disparities to bring it to American society. It might seem strange, you write, that during the 19th century of mass immigration from Europe to the United States, it was not uncommon to find Jewish and Italian neighborhoods in New York represented by Irish politicians, a situation that did not change until well into the 20th century. How could this have been?
Because if you look at the history of the three groups, it's clear that the Irish had a lot more political experience in Europe before any of them ever set foot on American soil. I mean, it's really, when you think of how many factors there are at work, it's incredible to think that they're going to work out the same for almost any group defined any way.
Got it.
The other thing, it's so frustrating. I can come up with umpteen different examples of disparities in various situations, including situations where it is not possible for it to be either discrimination or genetics. People on the other side cannot give you one example. You can read reams of paper by advocates of social justice and not find one example anywhere in the world. There are people who've done international studies. Braudel, I quote, the French historian. He said, in no society has all parts of the population had the same outcomes.
All right. You note also, by the way, that even within, this I found striking, even within socioeconomic bands or strata, that is people who, or ethnic groups that are actually doing pretty well, there are differences that can be striking. And to quote you again, Jews have been especially well represented in retailing, finance, and garment production, but by no means equally well represented in heavy industries such as the production of steel or automobiles.
Yes.
And it has nothing to do, we're not talking about relative disadvantage here. Mm-hmm. They rose to success in different fields.
Yes.
From, I don't know, Andrew Carnegie, I guess, is a Scot who's doing steel, and Ford and the Dodge brothers are what, Northern European stock who handle automobiles, and it just worked out that way.
Yes.
For no invidious reason.
Yes.
All right. You see, if you just say yes, well, of course, if I just quote the book to you, you're going to say yes.
Which is what you should do all the time.
All right. To continue here, to lay out your argument, again, I'm going to quote you, but I'm going to get more than a yes out of you, Tom, on this one. Statistical underrepresentation or overrepresentation of various groups is not peculiar to the United States or to our times. For centuries, there have been countries where most members of various professions and most business owners in whole industries have been members of some subordinate minority. All right, you present a couple of examples. Let's take a couple of examples. The overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia.
Oh, yes.
Tell us about them.
Oh, my gosh. Some people call them the Jews of Southeast Asia. Considering the numbers involved, you might call the Jews the Chinese of Eastern Europe. But there are country after country where over half of the retail outlets are by people who are Chinese. I mean, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, whatnot. There are countries after countries where most of the billionaires are Chinese.
Outside China.
Outside China. And this, one of the other things, too, is this ties in to some extent with a genetic thing. As of 1994, there were 57 million overseas Chinese and 1 billion people in China. The 57 million produced as much wealth as the billion people in China.
All right. Jews in Eastern Europe, as another example of a subordinate group.
Yes.
Tell us about them.
It's very common for retailing in many parts of Eastern Europe to be largely in the hands of Jews. Greatly overrepresented in universities. By the late 19th century, 1/3 the people at the University of Vienna were Jews, and they were usually the more successful students.
Right. Indians in East Africa.
Oh my gosh. And here you see something that ties in with a desire to confiscate the wealth of the wealthy. They did that in Uganda. The people from India and Pakistan dominated modern industry in that country. Eventually, of course, the politicians decided that they should be expropriated. They were expropriated. They were sent out, not allowed to take any wealth with them of any significance. And all the stuff that was left there, their businesses and so forth, went to the Uganda. The Ugandan economy collapsed. These people arrived destitute, mostly in England, and within a decade, they were on their way to prosperity again. The same thing with the Cubans here, that when Castro took over.
Castro takes over in 1959, 1 million Cubans leave with almost nothing.
Yes, and he left behind all the wealth they had in Cuba. You fast forward a half a century, and the Cuban-American businesses in the United States had a revenue that was larger than the revenue of the entire nation of Cuba. Even though, and they weren't, in the United States, they weren't driving 1950s cars in the 21st century.
All right. All right. So the underlying assumption, just to close up the argument here, the underlying assumption of the social vision, the vision of social justice, that absent discrimination, roughly equal outcomes will prevail, is refuted by every page of recorded history.
Yeah.
All right. Jews in Eastern Europe, overseas Chinese in Southeast Asia, they rise in spite of discrimination.
Yes.
All right. Okay.
And they rise better than the people who are discriminating against them.